I'm going to introduce Sama, who is a very good friend of the cause, who last year at our annual board meeting did a presentation to our board, which I would say was about 6 months earlier. I had come up with an idea for a program for the LGBTQ hotline, and I presented it to the board kind of informally, and they said, Reese, if you come up with one more project, you're going to have to go out and get the money first and then bring it to us before you bring up any more projects. And I was like, okay. So I brought Sama in instead to present, and by the end of the presentation, she had each of the board members literally pulling out their Rolodexes, figuring out where we were going to get the money to fund this project. She had so moved them, and I was like, we need to make sure that every IMAlive volunteer understands the impact this community is dealing with every day. When you look at America, the resources we're finally throwing at the veteran community, which is extremely hard hit. No one knows what the true statistics are in the LGBTQ community, but the transgender community, it is off the hook. There is no community that is more profoundly affected and least supported in any way, shape, and form. And if we do not help those who are the least supported in our community, then we have no business being in this field. So I think there's no one better to present how that language does affect folks from that community, and how we in the helping community can become more tuned to their needs. And if a lot of people look at this and say, well, you're not a very big organization. Well, 1-800-SUICIDE started with one crisis center, one telephone line. Today it's over 200 crisis centers nationwide, and over 6 million calls have been answered. IMAlive started, with a URL, right? No marketing, no promotion. Over 8,000 people signed up to become volunteers. Over 600 people actually got into the training. Of those, over 200 of them completed their training. And today, over 50 people on an active basis are OSIS volunteers, many of you guys right here today. So, from small things, and if the foundation of what we're starting from here today begins with the core of understanding the needs of all our at-risk communities that we serve, not just veterans, not just teens, not just moms suffering postpartum depression, but all communities. We don't need to be LGBTQ specialists to be able to listen to their pain and be able to reflect back to them how much we do care unconditionally. And that is that's the purpose of this. So, Sama, my deepest gratitude for your courage and willingness to persevere and to share with the group.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I'm Sama Balomo, and I'm going to start us off with a little video just to get everybody in the mood to listen. What I'm going to talk about this morning is pretty heavy, but I will try to be as direct and as far from dramatic as possible, because I would really like you to take in what I have to tell you.
Don't get me wrong, I'm glad that I haven't been murdered, imprisoned, beaten, dragged behind a truck, shot, or mutilated for being some flavor of queer. But safety is not a privilege, it's a human right. I've never lost everything for being who I am, and I won't start worrying about it now. In fact, I believe I do have a place in society, somewhere on the map, even if it doesn't feel that way. I have a right to speak and listen, and to educate myself about anything I wish, any way I wish, and to derive my own conclusions about who I am. I have a right to enjoy those conclusions about my gender, and to change them if I feel that those conclusions only apply to a limited time frame, or that they put me at risk, or if I simply change my mind. With the responsibilities of protecting my body, so come the privileges of enjoying it and adapting it to my needs and values. I have the constitutional right and a moral responsibility to vote because I expect my legislators to provide for me the same legal protection that everyone else already has. I am privileged because I have unbridled and immeasurable support from those I love, support that seems to grow in quantity as I need it and never shrinks, even in disagreement. I would enjoy the privilege of my gender being a non-issue at church, in the hospital, or in any place where my gender conflicts with an antiquated status quo. I have the privilege of living in a country where I do not have to, by law, spend my money on a dress, a bonnet, or a burqa if I do not wish to. I am genetically female, and I am dedicated for life to a lesbian. This is by my own choosing, though, and not my parents' or my religion's. She asked if I was ready to change the pronoun to he. I am, but using she is okay, because the female pronoun is my lesbian partner's identity. That's a valid compromise in a relationship. We share the privileges of each other's respect, and so we share the responsibilities for validating each other. I have a right and a responsibility to accept the abilities and challenges of my own body and mind. However, in acknowledging that I have limits, it does not mean that I am universally limited. It does not mean that I am unable to express who I am because of who I am not. Although my gender identity does not promote the behaviors and values that society would prefer I act out, I am still entitled to express myself in ways that I find acceptable by the cultural methods under which I was raised. There are times when I feel a severe pressure to look, act, and seem female. At those times, I couldn't feel more unnatural. But I'm willing to carry a reasonable portion of the work in activism, legal testimony, and awareness, because I want the number of rights I have to increase, and I also want the aggression toward the transgender community to decrease. I believe the two are related, and that they are sadly disproportionate. A few key words remind us of what happens when the fears of others get a hold of us, and we start feeling responsible for other people's misdirected anger or ignorance. These words are so common that we dismiss them as buzzwords that only happen in the news. However, they are not immutable, and I invite you to refute the negative feelings that you may have about being transgendered. Those feelings may include resentment of the workload that comes with transition, the fear of being unacceptable, the misconception that it is right to be uncomfortable if it allows you to perform in society. On the contrary, a sense of personal well-being can lead to the identification of an inappropriate or unhealthy niche, leaving you in the position to uproot and to choose a better situation. Don't get me wrong, it's a bumpy and uncertain road, but if you take the time to assert your privileges and exercise your rights, you may find that socially you are more fitting as your true self than as a model placeholder for someone just a little bit more secure than yourself. It is healthy to want others to understand you after you have taken the time to understand yourself. Understanding leads to privilege, and if the latter is absent, perhaps it would be good to reevaluate the former. Be well.
The first slide I'd like to start with is just a quick good morning.
Morning.
Everybody, if you want to have a stretch, it feels pretty good. Take a second and smile genuinely to yourself for good work, a job well done. I'll let you read the rest. While I dictate, I don't like to read from slides. About me, I work for a nonprofit that supports people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. We help them achieve a full community life. We believe in full inclusion, no institutions. We don't believe in separations, political, social, economic divides, none of that. I identify as transgender, which I will explain more in depth later. I am the co-host of a collaborative YouTube channel called Tiny Star Galactica, where each week we discuss issues relating to the trans community from 7 different perspectives, and I'll tell you more about that later as well. I work with Gender Empowerment Maryland, and we're working with the Gay and Lesbian Task Force to develop a leadership program so that trans people can not only assert themselves, but learn to protect others. My wife and I, Julie, Every year we testify in front of our legislators for our rights, and we highlight everything that's wrong with our community in a very short period of time. And we hope to God that our legislators are listening. It's a very arduous process, and we go through a lot of belittlement and deridement just for that much. But it is one of the most important pieces of work that we do, and sadly, most people feel in our community that they're unequipped to approach our legislators and ask for their rights. So that's a big thing, is a lot of people feel powerless because they don't feel educated, or they don't feel like they're able to be educated. So this presentation does use a few pre-upsetting scenarios. If you need to leave, I won't be offended at all. I would like to ask for your comments, thoughts, and questions. You won't offend me. I would love to start this discussion so that we can start discussions with others who need the help. I want to share these experiences because hearing about them can be very startling, and we all know it's better to have some familiarity with subject matter when we're counseling someone in crisis. We are mocked, dragged behind cars, we're condemned, lit on fire, beheaded, tortured. It's a worldwide issue. It's not like there's some pocketed community somewhere. We are not like the veteran community. We're not separated by a political divide. We're everywhere in the world, and we're all ages, we're all races. If a trans woman is discovered in a bathroom, she risks being beaten, filmed, and outed on the internet. If a trans man is discovered in a bathroom, he may be challenged to fight like a man. He may be raped, to be convinced that he is a woman. For us, it's a very real fear, and it's a constant, imminent danger anytime we use a public accommodation. Imagine how often this happens in schools just for somebody appearing to be, let's say, a boy who appears effeminate. Now amplify that by the capabilities of an adult to do harm on another adult. So these are some of the terms that we hear often. We are no stranger to these terms, and we're not immune to them. We're not used to them. They don't knock us off our feet as often as they might others because we hear them so repeatedly, and it's on a daily basis that we hear or remember at least one of these things. So what would an LGBTQ program do that the general program cannot do? The discrimination that happens is direct, and the response must be direct. What I mean by this is that even if you're an ally and you don't feel like you can relate for one reason or another, and I would assume that all of you actually can in some way, but even if you don't feel like you can, it's okay to approach the subject as openly as you can, because you will not make a mistake if what you are doing is out of love and concern. So I want to talk a little bit about who's at risk. We've heard of, maybe you haven't, the Trevor Project is a very popular program right now because there's the buzzword on the news of gay teen suicide. But the Trevor line actually says on their mission page that they are not a chat room for people in crisis. Furthermore, they only support gay youth or LGBT youth. So all of these other populations are on their own as far as Trevor Project's concerned, and Trevor Project would then refer to other agencies. But there is no central agency that can handle these calls, vet resources, and provide supports. I would peg the most immediate risk for us right now. Have you all gone through the OSIS training? Okay. So Paul Quinnett, who wrote the training, posits that people approaching retirement age are among those most high at risk. And it's the same thing here. And the reason is, after the civil rights movement and after the 80s and the AIDS epidemic, people were much more forthcoming with their sexuality and gender identity. And what's happening to older adults is that they're coming out to their wives, their families, they're losing their children, their jobs, their pensions. Now what's happening is, as the baby boomer population ages, They're going into supported living environments like nursing homes, subacute facilities, and they're not getting the supports they need because there's no training, no sensitivity, and their access to technology that the next generation has is limited comparatively. So that's something to be aware of, and that is a population that we need to reach out to.
And the abuse is so much more common than people realize in those communities.
Absolutely. And
fear from the other residents.
When we, in the younger generation, are thinking about things and we have questions, we turn to the web, and we're pretty good at researching. It's sort of second nature. But if you are in that baby boomer population, you're a bit more isolated because you don't necessarily have those skills. And those skills, you can't go to the library and research these things because the print material is not there, certainly not in the abundance that we find it online. So this is a population that if they are questioning later in life, they may not know even how to think about it. So they may feel something and they're not sure how to discuss it or how to describe it. So I would encourage you to sort of look up different ways that we discuss those topics. Trinity Star Galactica is an example of how we do that. Something that I want to mention is that the youth is a significant chunk of the population, but it's not the entire population. Counselors and leaders, like in the Trevor Project, who work with youth, I think it's best that they specialize there. I would not want to persuade them to expand because I think youth are particularly at a different flavor of risk. So that's a reason that I brought this to IMAlive, is because we work with everybody. So why chat? Well, I think the biggest issue in the trans community, and I'll speak more about the lesbian and gay communities as well, is, for example, I identify as female to male, but my voice to me sounds like Mickey Mouse. I can't stand it, and when I need to call for help, I don't want to hear myself talk. It's the last thing I want to do is say something. So being able to chat with somebody is really a very specific benefit to the trans community that just has huge implications. Huge. There are issues where if you are questioning youth, you may be afraid that if you make a phone call that, for example, your parents will overhear. We're at risk of death for that. There's actually, for example, there's a young man in Turkey. I have two friends in California who also work on YouTube. They do a show called Gay Family Values, and they explain sort of these same discussion topics from the perspective of two gay men with a family of children. And a man from Turkey reached out to them and said, hey, I'm 19, I'm gay, and what happened over the next several months was that he had become suicidal several times over, and Jay is a veteran, so he knew as much from his own experiences how to support this person, but he actually ended up buying a plane ticket, going to Turkey, and getting this guy out of there because he got shot. Because his father saw his email reaching out to Jay and Brian and flipped out, and they shot him. Okay, so this is a very real and current issue. So being able to chat for him particularly was a very, very big deal because he could not speak in his home. It is worldwide. I don't even know how to stress how big the problem is, but if that's any indication. There's also a series of economically disadvantaged people, those who are homeless. One of our hosts on Trinity Star Galactica is homeless, and she sits outside the library and posts her videos every single Sunday, and we just hope she'll be there. There's a cost of having 2 wardrobes for a significant amount of time. Some people live out of their trunks. Some people will, if they live at home, or if you're in a marriage where the person is not accepting of your gender identity, they may raid your belongings and throw all your stuff out. Read your journals, post them on the internet. These things happen. Those who are recently released from jail, a lot of us are in jail. because of a lot of different reasons. But let's take a lighter reason. Let's say you can't afford 2 wardrobes. Maybe you can't afford 1, and you steal something and you go to jail for it. What happens in jails is a whole different ball of wax. If you've been in jail and you're transgender, or if you've been in a mental health facility and you're transgender, you may be put on a floor with people who are not your identified gender, which puts you at higher risk of all the assaults that go on in those places. Okay, so now that everybody's been depressed, what to do about it? In 1 year's time, I would like to stop the bleeding. And what I mean by that is I would like to take current IMAlive volunteers who do not necessarily have to identify with our population and teach them what they can do. I want to build supports, build a network, resources and research that support the kind of work that we do here so that you feel prepared if somebody reaches out to you for support. It's going to take some time to get LGBT people trained. There are the financial restrictions, and believe it or not, it's a very small handful of people. I approached 20 people in my community about coming today. I offered to cover the cost, and all but a very small handful said, it hits too close to home, and I'm so close to suicide so often that I'm terrified that this will trigger me. I can't do it. I'm sorry. That's a very important thing to be aware of. So within 5 years, so ASAP, but I'm going to give it a 5-year delimiter, I want to develop a guided set of protocols and referrals to suit those subsets of community. The lesbian community has a number of subpopulations in it that need different kinds of supports in different regards. They're victims of everything that women go through, and then also being lesbians puts a whole new series of nasty vocabulary around their daily lives. It's not fair, and it's as old as the hills. Even less, arguably less accepted are gay men, because how many times have we heard the double standard in our community that, oh, it's okay if it's okay, I'm okay around lesbians, but I don't want to be around any gay men because I don't want them coming on to me. It's a very common argument by heterosexual men. There are stereotypes that we are constantly defeating, like that lesbians are man-hating. There are stereotypes that gay men have to play down, like that they are limp-wristed, or that they're somehow weak because they're in love, because they dare to love. I'm not a professional in this field. I'm an IT guy. I don't think all of us got into this work because we want to be here. It's just we saw a need, and I think it's really impressive that you're all here and listening. And I have everybody's eyes, and I really appreciate that attention because it means you're listening. My personal reason for being here is that I'm no stranger to suicide, and the most recent is within the last year. A friend of mine, who was actually a co-host on Training Star Galactica, took her life, boiled Drano, because she went to the VA for support and didn't get it. The VA has recently increased their supports for people who are trans, but it's still not really there. So they're sort of on par with you actually now, because they're aware that there's a problem, but they're not sure how to think about it or how our community talks about it. And it's because people are so raw and triggered that who can handle stepping forward? Who's strong enough for that? It's just a lot. So she went to the VA and didn't get help. Her family is a flavor of religious that is not at all accepting and is very liberal with distributing their judgments on her. Her sister committed suicide, which we know increases the risk of suicide in others, people who survived. And there was nowhere for her to go like this. And she never would have picked up the phone and called anybody. She wouldn't call a friend. But I bet she would have talked about it if she had someone to type to, because that's the kind of person she was. So These are all the different groups that cause complications, and they're deep. I mean, I could address each and every one of these, but I'll spare you the time because I'm a little bit limited. Next slide is some discriminants. This is sort of a breakdown of how these things work, and I just want to read this off. HIV status, addiction, blood donation, aging, end of life, healthcare, hormones, surgery, psychological diagnosis, misdiagnosis, relationships, grief, exploration, denial, religious, education, self-defense, murder, public facilities, stress, moving far away. A lot of people will move away so that they can come out. They lose everything. Ex-gay camps is a particularly traumatic population that is very likely to reach out because they've been through the process of reaching out, and on top of that, they're going to try to overwrite their experiences. So you may get a lot of people who've been through ex-gay camps, particularly people with religious backgrounds. Then about religion, there are also religious people who want to stay faithful and need to find churches and institutions that will support them, and they are out there. Moving along, media misrepresentation, homelessness, higher taxes. Gays and lesbians in most states are not considered legally wed. Julie and I were married in DC as soon as it was legal. It doesn't matter in Maryland. We still pay individual state taxes. Having 2 wardrobes, legal fees, because we don't have the protections of marriage, and I don't want to get into a political argument. It's not what I'm here for. But it does incur legal costs because we have to do extra paperwork to try to protect ourselves as equally as possible. ENDA, the Employment Non-Discrimination Act, is something we're all working to pass and enforce so that we can simply be ourselves at work. Banishment, parenting, fostering, adoption, bullying. Now that I've read them all off, I'd like you to think about, just for a second, which of these applies to your life in general. I'll bet you identify with at least 3 to 5. So you can see that we go through all of the same issues that everybody else does, but on top of that, there's the component of being part of the LGBT population. The goal. I want you to understand that in addition to the same problems we go through, we're all going through these extra hardships that causes detriment to these groups. And we are connected to our community. We're not in some sort of segregated pocket. We exist in the general population among everybody else. There's no club. You know, we get a lot of that. Like I was in the hospital and the nurse was like, "Oh, I have a friend who's gay or a daughter or something, and do you know them?" By first name. I didn't even live in that city. And we get that. And no. No, I don't. I've never answered yes to that. To do suicide prevention is to break the isolation that kills. I'm going to say that again. To do suicide prevention work is to break isolation that kills and connects us to one another as people. By sharing these points, I'm asking for your help as liaisons to that process. Where to turn? So what is the LGBT community doing about it? Why you? Well, is the problem that people aren't finding these services and that they're out there, or that there aren't any? The truth is a little bit in between the two. Some services exist, but they do fall egregiously short. Just like IMAlive, they mostly lack in funding. But again, we have all of that fear and all of that history behind us too that makes getting help problematic. As I've said, YouTubers do a lot of work to illuminate those issues, and we get an enormous amount of email from the community, and I'm going to read some off to you in just a minute, because I want you to hear what people reach out with so that you're used to it, because what you're going to hear is very similar to what you'll hear in a chat room. Okay, so about Training Star Galactica. Our goal is to end the isolation. That's simply it. We just want to stay connected with one another And each week we get people who say, oh, I'm here another week. We don't know where they are or who they are. We just hope they're going to show up again next week. We look for those comments from them that say, hey, great video, here's what I think. And sometimes we get somebody brave enough to post a video response showing their faces for the first time in a recorded message. Some of those messages are privately sent to us and they're, hey, I'm moving out. Or, hey, I came out as a lesbian to my dad and he beat the crap out of me. So I'm at a hotel in Georgia, you know, a person from Kansas. And I don't know when I'll be able to communicate again because they shut my phone off and I don't have any clothes or any money or anything with me. So where do you go? There's all kinds of groups, but excuse me, for us to be able to field all of those emails and all of those calls is a full-time job. And it's something that some of us are so close to that we don't have it in us all the time to always be on guard and ready for those people. Some of our sample topics are when different groups of people in your life use different pronouns, how does it affect you, if at all? How do you respond to others, both outwardly and in your own mind? Two different ways of thinking, yeah. How do you talk to children about gender? How did you choose your name? Are there aspects about your lifestyle or your gender identity, sexual orientation that currently seem unattainable? What are the obstacles? How do you overcome them? So we address these problems, but you'll find a lot of people going, I don't know. I don't know. I did it because I fought my way through it. People do it on a very isolated and narrow path. So that's something to be aware of. The isolation is just a natural thing for this community, just to be afraid, go under the radar, and slide through until you're safe enough to move across the world in some instances. LGBT 101. These are some loosely defined terms that I came up with based on public resources, but keep in mind that one of the main barriers to our achieving the supports we need is that we can't all agree on what certain terms mean. For example, a trans person might refer to somebody whose genetic makeup matches their gender identity, because we separate the two, sex and gender. One is biological, one is social, or psychological, or internal. And if we use the word cisgender to describe somebody whose sex and gender match, for example, a population of radical feminists find the word cisgender offensive. There are other feminists who find the word harmful and painful to hear. And there are some people who find other terminology triggering, like the word fag. It's like the N-word to some people in the community, and other people use it liberally to take the power out of the word. So that difference in the use of language makes it very difficult for us to move forward. I don't know how to resolve it, so what can we do in the meantime? Learn to deal with it until we find a solution. And that's where you come in, is learning to accept that we don't even know the vocabulary that's going to work most universally, and so we don't expect our allies to know that either. The best thing our allies can do is listen and talk to us, ask questions. That's it. It's really that simple, just like any other protocol. But do acknowledge in yourselves that it's going to be different on a case-to-case basis, and I'll show you a little bit about how to accommodate for that. Just another quick rundown of the key terms: LGBT, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender. Trans or transgender is the umbrella term for the trans community. Queer is sort of the umbrella term for everybody. People who are questioning, or queer, people who are gender non-conforming, all of those things fit under the term queer. But again, it's another sensitive word where not everybody feels that that's an appropriate word because it sounds like there may be something wrong with them, and that's not the case. So some of us use the words and the language to take the power out of it, and some of us avoid it like it's a bad word. Here's a boatload of vocabulary for you. Okay, this is some of the language we have. The list is a mile long. I mean, it extends way down to the floor, this slide. And I just said, forget it, they'll get the point. And this is not exhaustive. So, ask for clarification. What does this mean to you? When you say you're queer, when you say you have gender dysphoria, what does that mean to you? Very important question. What does that mean to you? You cannot possibly be sensitive to everyone. Always ask for clarification. It's important that you do, because you'll be able to, in asking, discern the person's identity in the same way that not all veterans are the same. A World War II veteran and a Vietnam veteran, different, but they share similar experiences, and so we can empathize without really having to pinpoint who they are as people, because some never find out, and some die before that happens. If somebody identifies as trans, it's okay to say, which pronoun do you prefer? How would you like me to refer to you? Some lesbians prefer to be referred to as dykes. Some don't. Femmies, butchies. There's a whole spectrum of language for each subpopulation. Again, it's that long, laundry list of words, and it's just a matter of asking. You won't offend. In fact, you'll make the person feel very validated, because they're going to say, in a lot of situations, I'm not sure. That's issue number one. And that's not the core issue. Keep looking. It's very seldom the core issue, because the underlying issue is, I'm afraid to look. I'm not safe to look. I looked and I got hurt. Somebody else I know looked and they got hurt. The issue with suicide in the community is that it's cumulative. We hear of one person committing suicide, we all feel it. Worldwide. Another person in our community commits suicide. We all feel it worldwide. And it happens over and over, and this cycle becomes isolating. When we become the LGBT population, we're not human anymore. We are our sexual and gender identities. And that dehumanization is where the isolation starts. It's that big global perspective that's too big to address in a chat room, but be aware that it does exist, and that's where it comes from, and that's why the fear happens. Some of my favorite things to hear. You're welcome to be anyone you feel you are. It's that simple. I don't care. I don't care what you are. I don't care how you identify. I don't care what language hurts you. Let's just talk about the issue. It's okay to move on beyond the identification. Labels are just words and frames for thinking about things. They're not concrete. We use those words because we want to get a hold of what we're trying to understand, not because we want to be stereotyped in this way. So if somebody says they're trans, you can't just say, oh, I understand, because we don't. They may identify completely differently. If you're struggling with your sexual orientation or gender identity yourself, or if you know someone who is, I encourage you to send me an email, get in touch with me, and I'll help them find resources. That is perfectly okay until we can get supports in place. I've lost all 3 of my BFFs now, and this just brings it right to the surface. So much change, and maybe she didn't know where to turn. It's sadly not uncommon. I had the same exact feelings on New Year's Eve and spent the evening with a loaded 357 in my mouth, finger on the trigger, and pulling. I've been a transsexual all my life, been on hormones for 2 years, nothing worked. I was almost ready to just go. I started wondering if she was getting counseling through the VA healthcare system. I've been through some issues, locally disputed medication approval. This is one of the weekly ones we get a lot. I didn't feel suicidal this time. Even my own doctor doesn't understand it. And she doesn't want to be my doctor anymore for the trans medical stuff. Where does one go? Being trans is a medical issue, and it's not just on one's head. Complete disrespect and laughter is what I encounter in being trans. Yeah, I'm always surprised when visiting hospitals just how many times my case will get handed off from doctor to doctor just because no one feels comfortable treating me and my so-called disease. Such a shame. We should see suicide as the ultimate and personal choice. Some people feel like it's the best thing we can do for ourselves because it's just not going to end in our lifetime. And we can either sign on and fight it or not. And we have to make that decision that life goes on. I've actually seen some people actually condoning suicide of gay youth. We can't let the bastards win. We need to be a community and be there when it gets too much for one of us. I'm not scared of dying in surgery at all. I guess it comes from being clinically depressed in the past and being so close to death. My feeling is that if I don't wake up, well, I've just been saved a lot of trouble. The pain far outweighs the fear of not waking up. I've attempted suicide 4 times. The list is just a mile long. This is what I hate about being transgender. If I were to mention this tragedy to anyone, and I do mean anyone, they'd either make a joke about it or accuse me of being a tranny. It does not get better. It's the second suicide this week. I called the suicide hotline and saw a number on a bus. The whole absurdity of it made it seem a bad note to end on. I generally feel like one's life is one's own for the taking. If they're in such a black place, it seems like the only course of action. And the response to that one was, call a friend, a suicide hotline. If possible, put yourself near other people. Really, it's the only thing it takes sometimes. Just one little thing, just being able to connect with somebody. You don't have to understand, you just have to be there sometimes. So thanks for being here, and enjoy the conference.